Title: When a homeless kid shouted, "Don't eat that," no one expected what would happen next. The Park Café was a magnet for the city's elite, tucked between rows of manicured trees, with the hum of a nearby fountain filling the air. It was midday, and the café was buzzing with life. Waiters in crisp uniforms weaved gracefully between tables, balancing trays of artisan dishes and freshly brewed coffee. The air smelled of warm bread and blooming flowers. But for one man, none of this seemed remarkable. At a prime table in the center sat Bernard Green, a name synonymous with power and wealth. He had built his empire from scratch, starting with real estate in his 20s and expanding into ventures most people could only dream of. At 72, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who owned not just his world, but perhaps the worlds of everyone around him. His sharp suit and gold-rimmed glasses reflected a life of opulence. Yet, as he glanced at the menu, his movements were slow, almost hesitant. Opposite him sat Marissa, his much younger wife, a woman who seemed plucked straight out of a magazine cover, her jet-black hair framing a face that was impossibly polished. Her bright red lipstick was carefully applied, and every inch of her screamed elegance. But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She twirled a diamond bracelet on her wrist absent-mindedly, her attention fixed not on her husband, but on her phone screen. Nearby, a boy lingered just beyond the patio fence. He was small for his age, his oversized hoodie hanging loosely on his thin frame. His dark eyes darted from table to table, scanning plates and pockets, looking for an opportunity. His name was Malik, though no one in the cafe knew him. His face was familiar on this street. A kid with nowhere to go, always on the outskirts of conversations and the edges of concern. Bernard glanced at his watch. "You're distracted again," he said, his voice calm but pointed. Marissa looked up and smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "I'm right here," she replied sweetly, reaching across the table to place her hand on his. "You know how much I enjoy these lunches." Malik's stomach growled. He moved closer, his footsteps almost silent, leaning against the patio railing. His eyes landed on Bernard's table, where a pristine white bowl of soup sat, flanked by fresh bread and a glass of sparkling water. Then something unusual happened. As Bernard adjusted his glasses and picked up his phone, Marissa's hand slipped into her designer handbag. Malik saw her fingers close around a small vial. She twisted it open with a casual flick, tilting her hand ever so slightly over the steaming bowl. The liquid blended with the soup in an instant, disappearing like it had never been there. Malik froze, his breath catching. Was this real? Could a woman who looked so perfect, sitting in a place so polished, really be doing what he thought? But Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. His heart pounded in his chest as he crouched lower behind the railing. He wasn't sure what he'd just seen, but the way the woman's voice carried those cold words, it sent a shiver through him. Malik's instincts screamed to walk away. Who would believe a kid like him, a boy in a threadbare hoodie standing at the edges of a world he wasn't welcome in? But his eyes kept returning to Bernard's spoon, now hovering over the soup. Malik knew what would happen if the old man took a bite. The moment stretched endlessly. Then, without thinking, Malik pushed himself off the railing and marched straight to the table. His legs felt like lead, but his feet didn't stop. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Don't eat that!" Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The clatter of a dropped fork echoed across the cafe. Bernard froze, his spoon inches from his lips, his wide eyes locked onto the boy. Marissa whipped her head around, her expression hardening. "What did you just say?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through glass. Malik didn't falter. His voice was shaky but loud enough for everyone to hear. "She put something in your food. I saw her. Don't eat it." Gasps rippled through the cafe as every patron turned toward the scene. The silence that followed was suffocating. Malik stood his ground, his chest heaving as adrenaline surged through him. Bernard blinked, glancing between the boy and his wife. "What is he talking about?" Bernard asked, his tone calm but his hand trembling as he set the spoon down. Marissa's composure snapped like a rubber band stretched too thin. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. "You little liar," she hissed. "How dare you accuse me of something so vile? Who even let you in here?" The words stung, but Malik didn't back down. His eyes remained locked on Bernard, desperate to make him see the truth. "I saw her. She poured something into your soup when you weren't looking," he said, his voice steadying. "You can smell it if you don't believe me." Bernard's face paled as he turned toward his wife, his eyes narrowing. "Marissa, what's going on?" Marissa scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "He's just trying to cause trouble. Look at him. He probably just wants money or food." She spat the words like they were poison. Her gaze flicked to Malik with open disdain. But the boy didn't waver. He stepped closer to the table, his fists clenched. "I'm not lying," he said firmly, his voice rising. "She doesn't want you to know, but I saw everything." Bernard leaned back slightly in his chair, studying the boy with a scrutinizing gaze. His face bore the marks of a man used to people playing games with him, trying to take advantage of his wealth. But this was different. The boy didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Malik, is it?" Bernard asked, his voice steady, though a trace of suspicion lingered. The boy nodded. "Yes, I'm telling the truth. Please don't eat it." Marissa let out a harsh laugh, crossing her arms as she stared Malik down. "This is absurd," she snapped, her tone icy. "He's just some street kid looking for attention. Are you really going to entertain this nonsense?" But Bernard didn't answer her. Instead, he picked up the spoon again, this time holding it closer to his face. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the quiet storm brewing within him. "Marissa," he said slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "You heard him. What exactly is going on here?" Marissa's mask of poise cracked further, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I can't believe you're even asking me that. It's insulting." She turned to the growing crowd. "He's lying. Look at him. He probably doesn't even know who you are. Why would you trust him over me?" The weight of her words hung in the air, but they didn't have the effect she'd hoped for. The crowd was murmuring now, their eyes darting between the three of them. Whispers floated through the air. "Did she really do it? Look at her, she seems nervous. That boy doesn't look like he's making this up." The murmurs only fueled Marissa's fury. She slammed her hands on the table, her polished demeanor gone. "Enough of this. Bernard, eat your damn soup and let's go," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. But Malik wasn't backing down. He took another step forward, his fists clenched tightly. "If you won't believe me, then call someone to test it," he said, his voice rising with urgency. "You're rich. You've got lawyers, doctors, people who can figure it out. But don't eat it. If you do, you'll regret it." Bernard's jaw tightened as he turned back to the bowl. The spoon was still in his hand, but he didn't lift it to his lips. His eyes, tired and calculating, shifted to his wife. Marissa, he said, his voice low. You've been acting strange for weeks now. Her face flushed, and she stumbled over her words. I don't know what you're talking about. You can't seriously think I'd poison you, Bernarda finished for her, his tone razor sharp. The crowd gasped audibly. Whispers filled the air. Malik, Bernard said, his eyes narrowing. You said you saw her put something in the soup. Can you describe it? The boy nodded quickly. It was a small bottle, like one you'd use for medicine. Clear liquid. She poured it in when you were looking at your phone, then stirred it. I swear I saw it. Bernard's face tightened. He turned to Marissa, who was already shaking her head. This is absurd, she said, her voice rising in panic. He's lying. Why would I? Bernard cut her off. Why would he lie? What could he possibly gain from this? His voice had a quiet authority now. The crowd murmured again, and the sound of sirens in the distance added to the charged atmosphere. Marissa's eyes darted toward the soup, and for a split second, her carefully crafted facade slipped completely. She looked cornered. Then, as if grasping at straws, she rounded on Malik. You've been spying. As Bernard finished speaking, the café was nearly empty, save for a few lingering patrons still processing the surreal scene they'd just witnessed. The weight of the events was heavy, and it seemed like every corner of the place had absorbed the tension of what had just unfolded. Malik sat across from Bernard, still reeling from the unexpected turn of events. He wasn't used to sitting at a table like this, much less being offered help from someone like Bernard Green, a man whose life seemed so distant from his own. Bernard cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Malik, I want to make sure you have a chance. A real chance. You deserve better than what you've been dealt. His voice was steady, but there was something in it, a sense of deep understanding, like he had seen the worst of what life could offer and still believed in the possibility of redemption. Malik felt the weight of those words. He wasn't sure what to make of them, but a part of him felt a flicker of hope, something he'd long forgotten to feel. His instincts told him to be cautious, to keep his guard up, but something in Bernard's voice made him want to trust him. I'm not looking for a handout, Malik said, almost defensively. I don't need anyone's pity. Bernard smiled, nodding and understanding. I know, and you won't get that from me. He paused, giving Malik a moment to absorb what he was saying. But I do want to offer you something that can change your life. I have connections, people who can help you get back on your feet. Education, work, housing, but most importantly, I want you to have a future. Malik looked down, unsure of what to say. The offer seemed too good to be true, but then again, what did he have to lose? I don't know. Malik hesitated, his mind racing. He wasn't sure if he could trust anyone, especially someone like Bernard, who had so much power and wealth. But then, remembering the fear in Marissa's eyes when the truth came out, Malik realized that maybe there was something genuine about the man sitting across from him. Bernard seemed to read his thoughts. I understand that it's hard to believe, but I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I'm just offering you an opportunity. You've already proven that you have the courage to stand up for what's right. That's something that can't be bought, Malik. The words hung in the air between them, powerful in their simplicity. Malik finally met Bernard's eyes, his own expression softening. Maybe, just maybe, he could take a step toward something better. After a long pause, Malik nodded. Okay, I'll give it a shot, but no promises. Bernard's face broke into a warm smile. No promises, Malik. Just a chance. With that, the two men sat in the quiet aftermath of the chaos, an unspoken bond forming between them. Outside, the world continued on, unaware of the small but significant shift that had just occurred inside the café. For Malik, it was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where courage and truth led the way. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the city, the lesson became clear to all who had witnessed the scene. Sometimes, it's not the ones with power who change the world. It's the ones who dare to speak out, to stand alone when everyone else looks the other way. Those are the ones who make the greatest difference.